you say that a lot about your feeling about wanting a guilty verdict, do you not?
I do agree that that is said in the book, and part of that is because I think it was a guilty verdict.
She wrote a book about the trial while the jury was still deliberating. She was the clerk of court, the elected official whose job was to protect the integrity of the jury, and instead, she stood in front of those jurors on the most important day of the trial and told them not to be fooled. Don't let them confuse you. Don't let them convince you. Watch his body language. Watch him closely. This is an epic day. The jury convicted Alex Murdaugh of double murder. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. And today, May 13, 2026, the South Carolina Supreme Court threw the whole thing out. 5 justices, 5 votes to overturn. The opinion describes the conduct of Colleton County Clerk of Court Rebecca Hill, known as Becky Hill, as breathtaking and disgraceful. It says her interference with the jury was shocking and unprecedented in South Carolina. It says she placed her fingers on the scales of justice and denied Murdaugh his constitutional right to a fair trial by an impartial jury. Those are not the words of a court that reluctantly found a technicality. Those are the words of a court that saw something so fundamentally wrong that it had no choice but to act. The justices wrote directly, "Although we are aware of the time, money, and effort expended for this lengthy trial, we have no choice but to reverse the denial of Murdaugh's motion for a new trial due to Hill's improper external influences on the jury and remand for a new trial." No choice. That is what 5 justices of the South Carolina Supreme Court said about throwing out one of the most watched murder cases in the history of this country. Not that they wanted to, not that they were happy about it, that they had no choice. The 2 life sentences Murdaugh received for the murder charges are now vacated, gone, as though they never existed. He will remain in prison, but not for the murders. He is serving a 40-year federal sentence and a concurrent 27-year state sentence for stealing approximately $12 million from his clients. The financial crimes convictions are untouched by today's ruling. He is not going anywhere, but the murder case has to start over. The ruling also addressed a second issue that will have enormous consequences for the retrial: the evidence of Murdaugh's financial crimes presented during the murder trial. The justices found that the trial court had allowed far too much of it. Prosecutors spent 12.5 hours across 10 trial days presenting evidence of the financial crimes, and the Supreme Court said the same point could have been made in a fraction of that time. In the retrial, that evidence will be severely curtailed. The financial crimes motive theory, which was the backbone of the prosecution's case, will be much harder to present the second time around. What that footage shows is the official response to a decision that the legal world did not see coming at this scale. A unanimous reversal, a breathtaking condemnation of a court officer, and a murder case that the state of South Carolina will now have to build again, from the beginning, with less evidence, and a defendant who has spent 2 years in prison insisting he did not do it. I need 1 second before we go deeper, because this case is going to keep developing, and I want you here for every update. We are pushing toward 1,000 subscribers, 1,000 people who want real coverage of real cases, not clickbait, not speculation, just the full story told straight. If you are not subscribed, hit that button right now, 2 seconds, free, and share this video with one person who needs to see it. That is how we get there. That is how this channel stays alive for cases like this one. Now, let me tell you about Becky Hill, because she is the reason all of this happened, and what she did is more outrageous than any headline has captured. Becky Hill was the Colleton County Clerk of Court. That title might not sound significant to people outside the legal system. Inside it, it's everything. The clerk of court is an elected official responsible for managing the evidence, overseeing the jury, and protecting the integrity of the proceedings. She takes an oath to uphold the law. She is, in the eyes of the court, in the eyes of the jurors who see her every day, an officer of justice. During the Alex Murdaugh trial, Becky Hill was around that jury constantly. She was the person they saw when they arrived in the morning. She was the person who managed their experience of the courtroom. She was a face of authority in a proceeding where the jurors were already absorbing an enormous amount of information under an enormous amount of pressure, trying to decide whether a man should spend the rest of his life in prison. And she used that access to push them toward a verdict. According to testimony of multiple jurors collected during the post-trial hearing in January 2024, here's what Becky Hill said to the jury during the trial. On the day Murdaugh took the stand, the most consequential day of the entire proceedings, she told them, "This is an important day. This is an epic day." She told them to watch his body language. She told them to watch him closely as he testifies. She went further. One juror, identified in court documents only as Juror Z, reported that Hill told the jury, "They're going to say things that will try to confuse you. Don't let them confuse you or convince you or throw you off." That same juror told the court that Hill's comments made it seem like he was already guilty before he ever said a word. Read that again. A court official, elected, sworn, trusted, stood in front of the jury and told them not to be convinced by the defense, not to be confused by the evidence the defense was presenting. Don't let them throw you off. In a criminal trial where the defendant is presumed innocent until proven guilty, the person responsible for managing the jury was telling them before deliberations even began that the defense was trying to mislead them. The South Carolina Supreme Court described this as Hill essentially imploring the jurors to find him guilty, the ultimate issue in the case. It said she became a character witness on behalf of the state, attacking Murdaugh's credibility outside the courtroom, outside the presence of the judge, outside the knowledge of both the prosecution and the defense. Nobody in that courtroom knew she was doing it. Not the prosecutor, not the defense attorney, not the judge. The jury knew, and at least one of them said it made him seem guilty before he ever said a word. Why did she do it? The court's ruling points directly to the answer. Becky Hill was writing a book about the trial, a tell-all, behind-the-scenes account of the Murdaugh case that she hoped to sell copies and make her money. The title was Behind the Doors of Justice, The Murdaugh Murders. The court found that her desire for a guilty verdict was connected to her desire to sell that book, because a conviction made for a better story, a more commercial product, a more marketable ending. She was attracted by the siren call of celebrity. Those are the words of the post-trial court, quoted directly in the Supreme Court's opinion. The elected official responsible for protecting the jury from outside influence was corrupting it herself for book sales. The book was eventually pulled from publication after plagiarism allegations were made against it by a co-author. Becky Hill resigned as clerk of court in March 2024 amid a South Carolina law enforcement investigation into whether she had abused her government position for financial gain. She was charged with obstruction of justice, perjury, and misconduct in office for showing sealed court photographs to a media photographer and then lying about it under oath. In December 2025, she pled guilty to 4 counts and was sentenced to 3 years of probation. 3 years of probation for corrupting the jury in the most watched murder trial in South Carolina's history, for selling access to sealed evidence, for lying about it under oath, for pursuing celebrity at the expense of the integrity of a proceeding that determined whether a man would die in prison. The South Carolina Supreme Court did not have the power to change her sentence, but it had the power to say what her conduct cost, and it did, loudly, unequivocally, in writing.
Before we go any further, there is something that needs to be said clearly and directly. Alex Murdaugh has not been proven innocent. He has not been exonerated. The murder convictions being overturned means the process was corrupted. It does not mean the outcome was wrong. And when prosecutors retry this case, they will still have evidence that the defense has never been able to fully explain. The most important piece of that evidence is the Snapchat video. On the night of June 7, 2021, Maggie and Paul Murdaugh were found dead near the dog kennels at the family's hunting estate in Colleton County. They had been shot multiple times at close range with powerful firearms that were never recovered. Alex Murdaugh told investigators he had been napping in the main house and was not at the kennels that evening. That claim collapsed when investigators found a Snapchat video on Paul Murdaugh's phone. The video was recorded at the kennels. In it, Maggie and Paul can be heard, and so can another voice, a voice that forensic audio experts identified as Alex Murdaugh's. The video was recorded at 8:44 p.m., approximately 20 minutes before the murders occurred, and less than an hour before Alex Murdaugh called 911, claiming to have just discovered the bodies. When investigators played that video to Murdaugh and pointed out that his voice was on it, he changed his story. He admitted he had been at the kennels that night. He said he had forgotten. He had previously told investigators he had not been there. His explanation for that lie, the word his own attorney used, was that he had forgotten. In the middle of a murder investigation into the deaths of his wife and son, he had simply forgotten he was with them in the minutes before they were killed. That video and the lie it exposed is still available to prosecutors. The Supreme Court's ruling did not address the Snapchat evidence. It addressed the clerk's conduct and the volume of financial crimes evidence. The video itself, the recording that placed Alex Murdaugh at the scene of the murders in the window directly preceding the shootings, contradicting his own initial statement, remains one of the most powerful pieces of evidence in this case. Prosecutors also have the physical evidence from the scene. Multiple gunshot wounds at close range, 2 separate firearms, a shotgun and a rifle, both of which were never found despite extensive searching of the property and surrounding areas. A crime scene that forensic investigators said showed the hallmarks of a targeted attack, and a defendant who, despite being at the scene moments before the killings, had no blood on him. A detail the defense has always cited and which prosecutors have argued is consistent with someone who knew what was coming and positioned themselves accordingly. What prosecutors do not have anymore, or have far less of, is the financial crimes evidence. That was the spine of the motive theory at the original trial. Murdaugh stole $12 million from his clients. He was afraid of being exposed. He killed Maggie and Paul to generate sympathy and distract from the unraveling of his financial crimes. The jury heard 12.5 hours of testimony about those crimes across 10 trial days. The Supreme Court said that was far too much. In the retrial, prosecutors will need to establish motive in a fraction of that time. That is a significant challenge, not insurmountable, but significant. The crimes happened. They are a matter of public record. Murdaugh pleaded guilty to them in state and federal court. The question is how much of that story prosecutors can tell in a murder trial going forward, and whether they can build the same motive theory they built in 2023 with dramatically less room to operate. What that footage shows is the single most damaging moment of the original trial. A man caught in a lie about where he was on the night his wife and son were murdered, and his explanation, "I forgot I was there," sitting in a courtroom in front of a jury that would convict him 3 hours later. That moment is going back into a new courtroom, and the question is whether it will be enough on its own. In the coverage of today's ruling, and in the coverage of this case going back to the original trial, there is a risk that gets higher the more sensational the story becomes, the risk that the people at the center of it fade into the background of their own case. Maggie and Paul Murdaugh were real people. They were killed. That is what this case is about. Not the clerk, not the book deal, not the Dynasty or the Downfall or the true crime documentaries. 2 people were shot multiple times at a dog kennel in South Carolina in 2021, and nobody has been held accountable for their deaths. That is the fact that everything else is built around. Maggie Murdaugh was 52 years old. She was described by people who knew her as warm and devoted to her family. She had been married to Alex Murdaugh for more than 2 decades. She did not know, could not have known the extent of the financial crimes her husband was committing. She was not part of the scheme that was unraveling around her. She was a woman who died in the dark outside her own home with multiple gunshot wounds and whose killer has not yet been convicted of killing her. Paul Murdaugh was 22 years old. He was the younger of the couple's 2 sons. He was already the subject of a separate criminal case at the time of his death. He had been charged in connection with a 2019 boat crash that killed a young woman named Mallory Beach, and that case was in progress when he was murdered. His own Snapchat video, the one he recorded at the kennels the night he died, the one that placed his father at the scene, was the most significant piece of evidence in the prosecution of his alleged killer. He recorded it without knowing what was about to happen.
It became the thing that told the world the truth about his father. Buster Murdaugh, the couple's surviving son, has said publicly that his father has characteristics of a psychopath, but that he maintains his father is innocent of the murders. That is a position that captures the impossible situation Buster is in. He lost his mother and his brother. The man accused of killing them is his father. He is trying to hold both of those realities at the same time. And now the conviction that was supposed to provide some closure has been overturned, and he is facing the prospect of watching a retrial of his father for the murders of his family. The South Carolina Attorney General said today that his office will aggressively seek to retry Murdaugh as soon as possible, possibly by the end of 2026. That statement is partly about legal posture and partly about the victims. Maggie and Paul Murdaugh's family has been living inside this case for 5 years. The trial was supposed to be the conclusion. It was not. The appeal was supposed to be the conclusion. It was not. The retrial is the conclusion. Whenever it happens, whatever it produces, that is the moment this case reaches something that can be called an ending. To understand why this case gripped the country the way it did, why it spawned documentaries and podcasts and books and a Hulu series and an HBO documentary and international media coverage, you have to understand what the Murdaugh name meant in Hampton County, South Carolina before June 2021. The Murdaugh family had dominated the legal landscape of the South Carolina Lowcountry for nearly a century. Alex Murdaugh's great-grandfather, grandfather, and father had all served as the 14th Circuit Solicitor, the top prosecutor in a 5-county region. The family law firm, PMPED, was one of the most powerful personal injury firms in the state. Alex Murdaugh was a partner. His name was on the building. His family name was on the courthouse. His family had, for generations, been the law in that part of South Carolina. That power was the context for the financial crimes that unraveled after the murders. For years, possibly for decades, Alex Murdaugh had been stealing from his clients, not in small amounts. He took millions from people who trusted him with their most vulnerable moments. A housekeeper named Gloria Satterfield died after a fall at the Murdaugh property. Her family hired Alex Murdaugh to handle their wrongful death claim against the estate. He settled the case, collected the money, and kept it. He told the family there was nothing to collect. He lied to grieving people who trusted him and took what belonged to them. He did variations of this again and again. He stole from personal injury settlements. He stole from clients who didn't know what they were owed. He stole from his own law firm. By the time it unraveled, the total was approximately $12 million across dozens of victims. He eventually pleaded guilty to both state and federal charges and is now serving 40 years federal and 27 years state on those financial crimes. But the financial crimes were not what made this case a cultural phenomenon. What made it a phenomenon was the sheer accumulation of darkness that kept revealing itself once the first thread was pulled. The boat crash in 2019, the death of Mallory Beach, the question of whether the family's legal power had shielded Paul from accountability for that crash, the shooting of Alex Murdaugh on the side of a road in 2021, which he initially claimed was an assassination attempt and which turned out to be a staged insurance fraud scheme designed to get his surviving son Buster a $10 million life insurance payout. The opioid addiction, the drug dealer and friend who allegedly participated in the fake shooting, the deaths that kept accumulating around this family, and at the center of it, the unsolved murders of Maggie and Paul. All of that brought the media. All of that brought the cameras and the documentaries and the podcasts and the books and the Hulu series and an HBO documentary and international media coverage. And all of that, every piece of it, contributed to a trial environment so saturated with pre-existing narrative that the question of whether Alex Murdaugh could get a fair trial was genuinely contested even before the clerk opened her mouth to the jury. The Supreme Court has now said definitively he did not get a fair trial. Whether the next one will be different is a question that prosecutors, defense attorneys, and eventually a new jury will have to answer. South Carolina Attorney General Alan Wilson stood in front of cameras today and said his office will aggressively seek to retry Alex Murdaugh for the murders of his wife and son as soon as possible, possibly by the end of 2026. That is the official position. Here is what the retrial is actually going to look like. The first challenge is venue. The original trial was held in Colleton County where the murders occurred, but the Murdaugh case has been covered so extensively, televised, documented, podcasted, dramatized, that finding a jury in Colleton County or anywhere near it that has not already formed opinions about this case is going to be extraordinarily difficult. The defense will almost certainly request a change of venue. Prosecutors may not object. Where a new trial could realistically be held, in a state where this case saturated every corner of the media landscape, is a logistical problem that could take months to resolve. The second challenge is the evidence. The Supreme Court has significantly curtailed the financial crimes evidence that prosecutors can present. In the original trial, that evidence ran across 12.5 hours of testimony, spanning 10 days. In the retrial, the court's ruling means that the same motive theory will need to be established in a fraction of that time, with far less limited evidence. Prosecutors are experienced, and the financial crimes are real. Murdaugh pleaded guilty to them, but constructing a compelling motive narrative in a murder trial with dramatically reduced runway is a different challenge than what they faced the first time. The third challenge is the Snapchat video. This remains the prosecution's most powerful piece of evidence. Murdaugh was captured on video at the murder scene in the window before the killings. He lied about being there. He changed his story when the video surfaced. The defense has never provided a satisfactory explanation for this. In the retrial, the video will almost certainly be the centerpiece of the prosecution's case, and prosecutors will need to build everything else around it. The fourth challenge is Alex Murdaugh himself. He is now 57 years old. He has been in prison for 2 years. He has spent years in the public eye as a convicted double murderer, then a convicted fraudster, and now an unconvicted murder defendant. Whatever he says on the stand, if he testifies, will be heard by a jury that knows his history with lying. His admission that he forgot he was at the kennels on the night his wife and son were killed is not going away. His financial crimes are not going away. His admission to an insurance fraud scheme is not going away. A new jury will know all of this. The question is what they do with it when they are no longer being told by the clerk of court not to be convinced by the defense. The fifth challenge belongs to the defense. They won today, enormously, but winning an appeal is not the same as winning a retrial. Dick Harpootlian and Jim Griffin, Murdaugh's attorneys, secured an extraordinary legal victory in getting the conviction overturned. They now have to go back into a courtroom and do it again, with the same evidence, against a prosecution that has had 2 years to study what went wrong and figure out how to do it better, and without the clerk of court inadvertently making their job easier this time. No trial date has been set. The case returns to the lower court. The process of establishing where the trial will be held, what evidence will be admissible under the Supreme Court's guidance, and how the proceedings will be structured will take time. Prosecutors want it done by the end of 2026. The defense will want time to prepare. The court will have its own timeline. And in the middle of it all, Maggie and Paul Murdaugh's family will be waiting again for something that looks like justice. What those two statements capture is the full tension of where this case now sits. A prosecution that is angry, committed, and promising to come back as hard as it can. A defense that is celebrating a legal victory while knowing that the real fight is just beginning. And a defendant who is still in prison, who has always said he did not kill his wife and son, who now gets to say those words again in a courtroom, this time without a court clerk telling the jury not to believe him. Today's ruling answered one question definitively. Was Alex Murdaugh's murder trial fair? The answer, from 5 South Carolina Supreme Court justices, is no. But it left open every other question that has surrounded this case since the night of June 7, 2021. And some of those questions are harder than the one the court just answered. The first unanswered question is the one at the center of everything. Did Alex Murdaugh kill his wife and son? The jury that convicted him in 2023 said yes. The Supreme Court has now said that jury's verdict cannot stand because its process was corrupted. What a new jury will say, with different rules about the evidence and without a clerk of court whispering in their ear, is genuinely unknown. The case against Murdaugh is serious. The Snapchat video is serious. His lie being at the scene is serious. The lack of blood on him is a problem for the prosecution that has never been fully resolved. The missing weapons are a problem. The timeline has ambiguities. A fair trial could go either way. The second unanswered question is who else might have had access to that property on the night of the murders. This has always been the alternative theory, that someone else came onto the Murdaugh estate and killed Maggie and Paul, possibly connected to the Mallory Beach boat crash case or to one of the many people Alex Murdaugh had frauded. This theory has never been proven, but it has also never been fully disproven. Investigators focused quickly on Alex. The alternative suspects were not deeply investigated, at least not in anything that reached the public record. In the retrial, the defense will have every incentive to push this angle as hard as it can. The third unanswered question is what accountability should Becky Hill face? She received 3 years of probation for what the South Carolina Supreme Court described as conduct that was breathtaking, disgraceful, shocking, and unprecedented. She will not serve a day in prison for an act that has now cost the state of South Carolina an entire murder trial and forced the family of 2 murder victims to go through the process again. The criminal charges against her did not specifically allege jury tampering. They were about the sealed photographs and the lying. The conduct that actually overturned the conviction was treated in the criminal proceedings as something separate. Many people following this case today are asking whether that was the right outcome. The court's ruling suggests the impact of her conduct was enormous. The sentence she received does not reflect that. The fourth unanswered question is what happens to the victims of families in the meantime. They have been waiting 5 years for resolution. They got a conviction, they lost it. They are being told to wait again. Eric Bland, a lawyer representing some of Murdaugh's financial crimes victims, told reporters today that his clients have forgiven Alex but have not forgotten what he has done, and that they will go through the process again. That is a statement of extraordinary resilience. It is also a statement about what this ruling costs people who are not Alex Murdaugh and Becky Hill, the people who were harmed and who are now being asked to wait longer for something that looks like justice. Alex Murdaugh is not free. He is not innocent. He is in federal prison serving 40 years for stealing $12 million from the people who trusted him with their worst moments. Today's ruling does not change any of that. What today's ruling changes is the murder case. The conviction is gone. The life sentences are vacated. The trial has to happen again, and the woman who made that necessary, the elected court official who corrupted a jury for the prospect of book sales, who told those jurors not to be fooled, not to be convinced, not to let the defense throw them off, is serving 3 years of probation. Maggie Murdaugh was 52 years old. She was shot multiple times at the dog kennels of her own home. Her killer has not been convicted. Paul Murdaugh was 22 years old. He recorded the video that placed his father at the scene. His killer has not been convicted. The retrial is coming. No date has been set. The Attorney General says as soon as possible. The defense says they are ready. A new jury somewhere in South Carolina will eventually be asked to look at all of it: the Snapchat video, the lie, the missing weapons, the absence of blood, the financial crimes reduced to their essential core, and decide what happened on the night of June 7, 2021. We will be here for every development, every hearing, every motion, every update on when and where that retrial will happen. Subscribe so you do not miss a single one. Share this video if you think the people in your life following this case need to hear the full picture, and leave your thoughts in the comments, because this case is not over, and it deserves the full weight of everyone paying attention. The scales of justice were tilted in that courtroom in 2023. Today, 5 justices said so. Now we find out whether a fair trial produces a different result or the same one.